During the golden years of the 5th console generation, Capcom was starting to drift further and further away from its previous adversary, Nintendo. It's common knowledge at this point that the N64 was very difficult to make games for, and a lot of the third-party franchises that established their names on Nintendo wanted nothing to do with them. For a whole laundry list of reasons, many turned to the PS1 as their new central hub, and Capcom was by far one of their strongest supporters, releasing a bunch of acclaimed hits, spawning revolutionary franchises, and achieving both of those things at a very fast rate. However, of the many exclusives that they'd go on to produce, none of them managed to stand out from the pack quite like the latest Mega Man project, Mega Man 8. And just by looking at it, you can definitely see why. You had all these very dark and serious looking RPGs and action games, and then comes along this cutesy kitty platformer that was also entirely in 2D. Did they seriously learn nothing from last time? However, something interesting happened. Mega Man 8 was actually received quite well. To both critics and fellow Mega Man addicts alike, 8 was seen as the spark of innovation that the brand truly needed, and was a substantial step forward for future games in the series to build off of. Everything about it was so fancy and new, it had so much more production and budget, and despite the fact that it was a 2D game, people were still blown away by how much more sophisticated and detailed the graphical style was. It was a monumental success for the brand, and given the fact that even more 2D platformers would eventually come to the PS1, it proved that 2D side-scrollers weren't going anywhere, and that it's still possible for a game like this to see acclaim and find its footing in an ever-so-changing medium. However, seeing how well evolving the classic series went, Capcom would end up giving those same resources and production values to the other Mega Man platforming series that people were starting to grow tired of. Mega Man X4 was released in the summer of 1997 and was met with acclaim from everybody. Critics thought there was a nice return to form for the series after X3, but Mega Man fans absolutely raved over this game, citing it as one of the absolute best in the entire series, with a select few saying that's even better than X1, which especially for the time was a very big statement given how it was seen as the gold standard. Especially nowadays, people still hold X4 in very high regard and consider it to be one of the very few peaks within the entire series. On pretty much all fronts, Mega Man X4 was seen as a massive success. So anyways, Mega Man X4 was the second to last game I decided to try out on the X Legacy Collection. I remember being kind of annoyed by Stingray's level as it was the first level I attempted, but overall, I had a very enjoyable time with it. But not as enjoyable of a time as I did with X1, X2, and eventually even X3. I've always had a very complicated viewpoint when it comes to this game, because while I did truly like it, there were still those few things that always held it back for me. I'd replayed this game a whole bunch in the years since, trying my best to enjoy this game more, but I still made my way to the end credits feeling very mixed about the whole thing. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that I have a vastly different perspective on this game than most people. However, I do want to make it clear that I do not hate this game. There are some things that this game does objectively better than any other X or even Mega Man game for that matter. Like most of these videos, I simply just want to shed some light on my experience with the game and the things that I find that does well or poorly on. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, nerds and geeks, and all my queer and non-binary peeps, this is Mega Man X4. Okay, so right off the bat, I just want to gush about just how much production went into this goddamn opening. You got this fancy new Capcom bumper, you got this absolutely sick anime intro that looks just as good, if not slightly better than the one found in X3, you got this really nice looking title screen animation alongside a gorgeous backdrop of the earth with some sort of threat lurking in the background. This is all just really well done. However, upon pressing the start button, For the first time ever in a Mega Man game, there are now 2 campaigns for you to go through. You can either stick with X, who plays more or less the exact same as you've come to expect, or you can play as Zero, who, in my opinion, makes his real playable debut here. Regardless of who you pick, your adventure is going to begin in the same place, yet another highway stage. The level itself is pretty standard, not that much we haven't already seen. However, the thing that became really apparent to me via playing this for the first time was how jaw-droppingly gorgeous this freaking game was. Like, holy cow, I didn't even mention the graphical style in X2 or 3 that much, because both of them just added to the graphics of X1 and called it a day. But they made it clear that they wanted the graphics in this game to be a central selling point, and it shows. The shading, the colors, the detail, and the unhinged flashiness of these environments, and especially these sprites, is mind-boggling. Even as someone who wasn't around when this game initially dropped, it still blew my mind how much flair and style that the art direction had. While playing, there's always something that catches your eye, there's always something happening, and in the backgrounds especially, there's always something going on back there. Like the very best of these sprite-based side-scrollers, X4's graphics are not only a treat to the eyes, but do an active job at keeping me engaged as I play. And that's design that I absolutely adore. Anyways, after defeating the first boss, one of 2 things will happen depending on the Maverick Hunter that you choose. In both scenarios, you'll get introduced to this person named Colonel, a person who works for this organization known as the Repl Force, which is a group that wants absolutely nothing to do with either Reploids or Mavericks, and is instead aiming to build its own nation completely separate from everybody else. That's pretty much all the info that you're given when you play as X, but as Zero, we learn that he and Colonel apparently have a past together, and that Colonel has a sister named Iris, who Zero finds wounded laying on the ground. It's in that moment that Zero asks the Colonel if he played a part in the attack on the city, to which he denies. Zero also brings up the fact that both he and the entire HQ is suspicious that he's gone Maverick, and asks him to drop his weapon and come to the HQ, to where Colonel starts panicking and retreats almost immediately. So yeah, something is definitely up with these guys. But anyways, we return back to the HQ with either Iris or this yellow guy waiting for you. Apparently his name is Double, and he just kinda shows up. X doesn't really even question it, he just starts taking orders from him. Weird. But anyways, our adventure can now properly begin. And my god, it took a while to get here this time. If you couldn't already tell, X4 pushes its narrative a lot harder than any other Mega Man game. Hell, even Mega Man 8. Capcom really wanted to show off just how much bigger the production values were, and besides, this was pretty common practice in a lot of AAA games at the time. They don't really show up that much, and you can skip them, thankfully, but regardless, I still feel like that's something worth knowing going into this one. But anyways, as either X or Zero, you now have access to 8 locations of all of the Mavericks present on screen. However, while X again plays pretty identical to his 16-bit self, Zero is, in a lot of people's eyes, the main star of the show given just how much he's changed since X3. He's pretty much the exact same as X in terms of mobility and movement, however, he's completely gone rid of the Z-Buster, for now at least, and is now fully committed to using his much more effective Z-Saber for combat. And yeah, it's pretty fun. While X is the more safer and methodical campaign, as he's more focused on blasting things from afar, Zero likes invading personal space and gets up close and personal with a lot of his foes. And to be honest, I find that Zero's playstyle manages to work a lot more effectively here, given just how much faster the X gameplay formula is. Slashing and dashing feels satisfying, sure, but a large part of that satisfaction comes from how smooth and seamless combat flows given how it's a lot more off the cuff. Needless to say, both characters are, in my opinion, equally fun to play as for different reasons. And whenever I choose to go back to this one, I have no problem jumping in as either one of these guys. And a pretty big part of the reason why is due to how well designed this entire game is for them. For the most part. When talking purely about the 8 main stages, they're all pretty solid. I'd say that balances out combat and platforming about as well as X2 did, and there's a lot of really cool set pieces that adds a lot of flair and action to these stages. But even with all that being said, I just can't help but feel like these stages aren't nearly as polished as they were before, and there tends to be a few things about them that actively annoy me. The enemy placement can be very obnoxious at some points, with a few of these guys entering the screen way faster than they should. Some parts of the stages just kinda throw everything in the kitchen sink at you with no real rhyme or reason. Some stages also feature some very out there gimmicks that do technically work, but just aren't that fun in my opinion. And pretty much all of these stages are very short. Like in Mega Man 8, the stages are broken up into two sections, both of which being pretty short. Now, in stages that feature platforming 100% of the time, I don't really mind the short length, but in stages like Peacocks or Owls that have gimmicky sections first and then move on to the platforming, I don't know, I just feel like the two conflict each other too much, and neither section I find to have that much substance given how quickly they end. I don't know, like, I don't think that the game has bad level design, not at all, but I just can't help but feel very mixed on it as a whole. There's some really good stuff in here, with just too many things holding it back for me. But on the polar opposite side of the spectrum, most of the collectibles from the previous games again return here, more or less functioning the same way as you'd expect. Unlike X3, X4 doesn't introduce that many new things to find. Actually, the only thing that comes to mind is the EX tank, which for some reason lets you start the level with 4 lives instead of 2. When talking about the armor set in this game, X4 features the best one hands down, the 4th armor. It has a headpiece that allows for infinite weapon ammo except for when you charge them, a leg piece that allows for mid-air dashing as well as being able to hover for a few seconds, a chest piece that reduces damage as well as being able to pull off a mid-air dash called the Nova Strike that can pierce through anything, and not one but 2 different arm parts to its name. You got one that can store up to 4 charge blasts that you can use at the push of a button, and then there's the one that not only gives you a gigantic charge blast, but it also leaves this plasma residue on whatever enemy it ends up hitting. So many perks to this thing. I'd argue that this is damn near broken with just how much easier the game becomes when you use it. It's just so overpowered, but not as overpowered as the ultimate armor, an armor that's only obtainable via a cheat code. It functions literally the exact same way, but you can now use the Nova Strike infinitely, so that has to count for something. Zero also has an unlock binder cheat code, that being Black Zero, but it's only cosmetic unfortunately. Sad face, but why I put that in the script? Speaking of the red guy, although he doesn't get any shiny new armors or the like, he does gain new moves with every Maverick that he defeats. A flaming uppercut, a side slash, and a spinny mid-air cartwheel just to name a few. It's a really cool perk that further helps differentiate the two, even if I do only use 2 of the 8 moves that Zero unlocks. The rest are mainly just boss weakness fodder, and speaking of which, the boss design in X4 is some of the best in any Mega Man game I have ever played. It doesn't really matter who you pick. All of the 8 main bosses are an absolute joy to fight, and I'd even argue that they're even better without their weaknesses. The fact that these guys have better telegraphed attack patterns and movement speed, as well as the fact that the Spark Mantle Syndrome problem is by far the absolute worst in this game, I just find fighting these guys with my bare essentials to be more satisfying and so much more engaging. It's because of the stronger boss design that makes X4 one of the more enjoyable games in the series in terms of routing. Similarly to X2, I don't really have a concrete order when it comes to choosing my next Maverick, and each of the items are hidden in a way that makes it pretty easy to get all of them with very little backtracking. This is true even when you go in the weakness order, which coming off of the past 3 games is a monumental deal. It should also be mentioned that X4 doesn't feature any side objectives like the X-Hunters or Bit and Bite, which many people don't really seem to care about, but I feel like something like this would make this game even more replayable than it already is. But after taking down all the Mavericks, we get a message from either Double or Iris that the Rebel Force army is planning to move its Utopia into space, and send you the coordinates for the spaceport that they're currently at. Both Maverick Hunters, suspicious of how the Rebel Force members have acted and how violent and threatening that they've been recently, come to the conclusion that these guys are a massive threat that needs to be stopped. So whenever you feel like you're ready, X and Zero charge headfirst into the spaceport. In my opinion, this is another fairly standard level. Some of the enemies are placed in some pretty clever areas, but I absolutely love the music that plays here. Actually, now that I mentioned it, I didn't really talk about the music at all in this game until now, mainly because I find this to be a very hit or miss soundtrack, and honestly, there are a lot more misses than hits, but there are a few hidden bangers, and Spaceport is absolutely among them. But soon enough, you'll finally reach the Colonel, and for the second time now, X and Zero take him out. But actually, both Maverick Hunters did have a previous altercation with him halfway through a Maverick killing spree. But while you actually got to play the X and Colonel fight, you have the displeasure of watching the Colonel and Zero duke it out. And I say displeasure because, man, like aside from one pretty infamous scene later on, this entire scene really set in just how miserable the voice direction is in this game. Like, it causes my mind legitimate pain thinking about how someone let this slide. But back to the present, X and Zero take out Colonel, only to find out that they're too late. The Rebel Force ship has already launched and is currently headed into outer space. And when they retreat to tell the HQ what happened, they find that Double and Iris have mysteriously disappeared. But obviously, these two don't want to waste any more time that they already did, so they head up to outer space anyway. They arrive, kill a couple enemies on their way up, and then... The hell? Okay, so apparently Double was actually a double agent all along, and Iris, after hearing that Zero killed her brother, finds this dark energy orb that corrupts her, as well as giving her this shiny new mecha suit. Nice. Having no choice, both Maverick Hunters finish them off, with Zero getting in the fields killing someone who he actually cares about, and thus saying the following line, X and Zero then rush through the rest of the space station until they find the General himself, who is in fact general-sized. They take him out, endure 15 minutes of boss-rushing torture, and then run into... Oh, Sigma, there you are, buddy. How you doing? Is your day going good? Mine's not. Okay, now, from their perspective, this is random as hell. But even still, I want to give you some context because I haven't really mentioned him at all until now. So at the very start of the game, we see Sigma gossiping to the General about how dangerous the Maverick Hunters are and how they'll kill any Maverick that they see as a threat. He says all of this only for the General to outright shun him, claiming that, and I quote, he will not betray the humans. But is totally fine leading an army that is causing violence amongst said humans. That, alongside this other scene during the Rebel Force announcement, is pretty much all we get from X's perspective. But like most things in this plot, Zero is the one who gets all the juicy stuff. To reiterate, Sigma used to work with the Maverick Hunters, and one day when he was out hunting, he came across a random cave and he decided to go explore it. But while doing that, he found a recently awoken Zero. Upon the two meeting up, they both throw a couple of hands, with Sigma not really standing much of a chance against Zero. However, long story short, Sigma ultimately stops Zero, who was then taken back to the HQ to be studied. And yeah, what was the point of me summarizing all that? Well, to show that Zero was in fact a Maverick at one point, and that Sigma knows just how powerful he is. That's probably the reason why you want to rebuild Zero in X2, because he has first-hand experience with just how lethal Zero can be. Something that also helps with confirming this is that the cave that Zero and Sigma fought in was also the exact cave that Zero awakens in at the beginning of his campaign, which is also the exact same cave that showcases the big revelation that Zero is the very last creation of Dr. Wily from the classic series, and again, Sigma knows that. He knows that thanks to this line from X2 that says that he's, and I quote, the last of the Doctor's creations. Like, all of that actually makes perfect sense. Like, damn, I gotta be honest for a second, ever since Mega Man 4, my standards for storytelling in the series have decreased greatly. But anyways, X and Zero take the fight to Sigma himself, and being 100% brutally honest, this is hands down the best Sigma fight of the entire series. Phase 1 features attacks that are so fun to dodge but are equally very challenging and require a lot of patience and focus to clear. But man, Phase 2 is where everything goes off the walls. There are these giant Power Ranger heads that barrage you with all sorts of elemental attacks and the like. Sigma transforms into 2 forms and it constantly changes throughout the fight. And my god, the music that plays here honestly speaks for itself. But after all of that, X and Zero defeat Sigma, but as they try to escape, they stumble upon the General, who briefly apologizes to them for the way that the Rebel forces acted, and then sacrifices himself by blowing the entire station up, taking Sigma with him. Both the X-Hunters escape via shuttle, and like the last 3 games, are left to ponder about their adventure. Although this time, the tone feels a bit more somber and depressing than it usually does. In X's ending, Zero is already home at the HQ, so when he contacts him, X asks a favor from Zero. The favor being, if he, for whatever reason, ends up going Maverick, he wants Zero to make sure that he's killed and rid of. Which, I mean, damn. Don't really know how any of those thoughts even entered his head, but I'm guessing that all the fighting is really starting to take a toll on the poor dude. Zero's ending is also kind of deep, learning about his past and fearing largely a lot of the same things that X is fearing. He doesn't really take the whole thing very well, to put it lightly, and aside from the HQ, he doesn't really have anything left. He killed his friends, he's disturbed by Sigma, he's overall just not in a very good place. Both hunters ride their shuttle across Earth's exosphere, putting a somber end to Mega Man X4. And let me just level with you all. In terms of impact and what this meant for the Mega Man brand, X4 is on par with X1. It was this exciting new leap into the future that was not only gorgeous, but had the benefit of receiving so much production, really making the whole package feel more grander and complete than ever before. The art style, the boss design, and the routing are some of the best in any Mega Man game. And while the voice acting was absolutely insufferable, the plot was incredibly well done and provides very satisfying lore that ties back to the previous games as well as the classic series in a very well thought out way. It's undeniable just how much passion and talent went into making a game like this a reality. It absolutely deserves every amount of praise it receives, and I can 100% understand why some consider it to be the best X game, hell, the best Mega Man game ever made. But again, even with me acknowledging all that, I just can't help but feel very mixed about the entire package. Both times I saw the credits roll, I still had this very middling reaction to it. Because every single time I played X4, I always felt like I was missing something about it. I still thought that it was a good experience, but I never saw it in any higher of a regard. And I really wanted to. With a game that looks as clean as this, with controls that feel as good as this, that has production values of this scale, I really want to love it in the same way that most people do. I still thought that was a quality experience, and I still did enjoy myself, but there were just always aspects of it, mainly the very inconsistent and shaky level design, that always held it back. Please don't get what I'm about to say twisted. I want to love this game more, but there's just too many little detractors that make it so difficult to do so. It's an incredible game, such a masterful and passion-filled project by Capcom, but I just can't love it in the way that most people do. But I mean, again, if I haven't already made this clear, all 4 of these games are excellent. X's impact on the entire Mega Man brand is astronomical. At a time when the industry was starting to get bored of the blue guy, X, Zero, and the various groups of allies, mavericks, and foes that they've encountered sets out to show the world a brighter future. A future that's not so colorful, that's not so simplistic, but a future that's nonetheless exciting. Its impact is unquantifiably huge, and it's impossible to overstate just how much it means to so many Mega Man addicts across the globe. And I can only imagine that most Mega Man fans at the time X4 came out were pretty curious about the next game. I mean, ever since X2, these games have always seemed like they were leading up to something. We're getting a lot more lore, a lot of past events were made relevant again, so it definitely feels like there's one event that's meant to tie up all the loose ends. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. Dropping obligatory ranking of the games here. Okay, bye!